Carroll, Michigan, so a lot of friends there. I can't. I was like living next to the RV. No, not there. Yeah, that it's outside. Anyway, I meant it to be. But somebody buys it or starts selling. I don't even know. I put it for 55. I thought it was not really. I like. But I just want to go back there because I want. Yeah, and I don't really do a lot of work anymore, but just, you're responsible. You have to be on the job every minute. Like I said, I was living in an RV.
Yes.
It really wasn't hooked up or anything, and so they didn't have the tip thing out, so I was sleeping on basically on the table on some cushions. Like, you know how they lift the table down? That was my bed for the last 4.5 months. So, it's like, why am I punishing myself?
Yeah, I don't know how you do that.
I don't know. It's like you get through it somehow. I don't even know why. I thought this is a good idea. I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? But it was good to see my friends, and just, it was so green there. Yeah. It's
How's
beautiful.
it going?
Good, how are you doing?
Doing all right?
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. Back in God's country.
Awesome.
I made it.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, you're back.
I know, as of yesterday. I'm still kind of vibrating from driving the 2,000 miles.
How are you?
Good to see you. Oh, let me get up.
No, don't get up.
I stepped on his foot.
He's got a big foot. I do have a big foot. How are you?
Great.
U-Haul. Elevator shaft. No, it's the elevator shaft for the elevator go down in the ground. Yeah. So they're gonna drop those. I think it's one of those where it's hydraulic from underneath. Some that are going. They put them in the ground already, or?
Yeah, there's some on the far side, they're going out.
Huh? With the elevator shaft, right? Yeah, they called us. We gotta do an elevator.
That's their water retention.
Those pipes are?
What?
They did call us about that.
Not an underground layer.
They don't wanna use they don't wanna put a pond on the property.
It's not a
So
bad
the
kid.
water will all go into those.
The same thing they did at
Under the
AutoZone,
building,
right?
man.
No, I didn't know that. I know AutoZone did that years ago, under their part. But there is an elevator. It's 3 stories tall. They have to have an elevator one right next to it. They called us last week, want some special concrete.
There's 11 of those things.
Really?
Like have them in Tucson, I know it's like, it's a huge.
So what do I gotta do? I heard they called.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
They're paying to have them go through the class?
Well, I tried to explain to them. We're just gonna go through the class. Guy, get over this idea. Get the shit if it's dirt.
A month and a half overdue.
I don't know what to tell them.
Yeah, because it wasn't, I knew it. Like right there. I was gonna escort him up to our yard. You know, and so then I found out about that, and then like a week later, they're like, "Yeah, no, like well, that's a good thing."
Good morning.
Alright. Alright.
Something that doesn't say that you might want to know is that he thought he had applied to do both of these last time, and we only had the information for one of them, so now he's going to go through and try the second one.
Alright. I second that. Aye.
I don't know if I don't know if this, do you guys want to hear what the board decided on all your stuff before or after our presentation? Yeah, okay. I can go ahead with this. I can do this if you need time. Okay. They've invited the board to come to this open meeting thing, so let's give it a couple minutes. I'll go through the board decisions from the last meeting. In short, everything passed except the Janet Ricks Alder thing in way south. The special use permit for Morgan Broderick passed there by Fertizona. Like I say, that 4.33 acres for multifamily for Janet Alder did not. That was a, I think that was that unanimous? Yeah, unanimous denial. The dog kennel in Matthewsville passed unanimously. The little bit of explanation, the bed and breakfast on Central Road, we had some clarification that the zone they asked for does allow for a bed and breakfast, but not a wedding venue or a large venue because of the parking. So they were approved for the bed and breakfast and not for the wedding venue. They will have to come back for a different zoning, same as the Star Barn, which was commercial general. And they will have to figure out some parking and some noise issues before they can go on with that. So that's where that ended up, and I think rightly so. Ty Hatch's rezone for CM across the river there by all the other industrial stuff had no problems getting through. Jake McBiles was the one that wanted multifamily there by the mine turnoff on the dirt road, and he got approved. I think probably he'll be able to do a lot less than he was hoping because he's on a well, he's along a canal, and he's only got an acre and a half, so I don't think he'll pull off as many multifamily units as he's hoping, but he did get approved to try. And let's see, what's this one? Larry Walters, which was the one that in the middle of Central who couldn't acquire some of the property by title, which was inside his fence. So he needed the smaller lots to have room for both of his boys. He got approved. Matt Sherwood, quite a bit of discussion on it, but he got approved for that multifamily there at Clough and Norton Road in Central. And let's see, the last one was the one out north of Sonoran Skies that had originally asked for 4-acre lots and then went to 3. Yeah. Maybe it was the other way around. He asked for 2 and then switched to 3. He got denied at 2 but allowed to go ahead with 3. So that got approved. So that's all I've got on previous board decisions, and ready to go.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jean Roof. I've met many of you, but some of you I have not. Some of you are new. I'm with the County Attorney's Office. I'm the Chief Civil Deputy County Attorney. And today I came to do a presentation on open meeting law. Some of you have seen this presentation before, but it's always a good refresher to go over the open meeting law rules. So I have a presentation, but I'm gonna stray away from that some, and I've kind of looked up the law most recently. There haven't been any substantive changes since the last time I gave the presentation, but I think that I've kind of created a better presentation than this, so we'll kind of be bouncing back and forth. But for those of you who don't know, open meeting law is something that's been enacted to maximize public access to government process. So you are a committee that does things for the board. You're subject to open meeting law. That means any deliberations and proceedings have to be open to the public. This is to prevent public bodies from making decisions in secret. There's a big push to, when in doubt, do things in open meeting as opposed to behind closed doors. The state ombudsman investigates complaints relating to public access law, and the Arizona Attorney General has open meeting law enforcement team that investigates complaints, but also has enforcement authority. The county attorney and the courts also have enforcement authority. So it's important to know that not only do these laws exist, but there are potential punishments if you do not comply with them. So first, let's just go through what you're required to do. So as you see, each week you have an agenda. We have to provide notice of that agenda within 24 hours before a meeting. You have to meet in public. You have to permit the public to attend with the exception of executive sessions, which I'll discuss a little further. You have to take all action in public, and you have to prepare meeting minutes. A meeting, and this is where this can get tricky. A meeting is a gathering in person or through technological devices. A meeting can even occur in email. And so I will go through this a little bit in greater detail later on in the presentation, but it's important to know that just because if you're all included on an email chain and you're discussing anything that you potentially are going to take legal action on, you could be violating open meeting law. You have to post, which this is more for planning and zoning, but you have to post a disclosure statement identifying the physical and electronic locations where public notices are going to be posted. And then you have to post an actual public notice 24 hours in advance of the meeting. This includes Saturdays, but it excludes Sundays and legal holidays. There are some exceptions, probably rare for you. I can't imagine that this would apply to you, but for the board, for example, there may be an emergency, and that's an exception to the 24-hour posting notice requirement. Also, ratifications actually require a longer notice period, so they require 72 hours. If you do not properly notice a public meeting and you take any action at that meeting, that action is null and void. And it can be ratified, but there can still be ramifications legally for you not having things properly agendized. So my whole thought is, when in doubt, just put more on the agenda rather than less. I noticed on our agenda when it just says, it gives like a brief of old business and you're discussing the board, what they've decided on certain things. I would actually put those on the agenda as individual items so that the public would know that you're discussing those. I know you're not voting on them, but just to be extra careful. So let's see. The notice must include the name of the public body, the date, time, and place, including the address and room number, and an agenda item or inform the public on how to obtain a copy of the agenda. We have to post it on the website and locations that are listed in the initial disclosure, and give additional notice that is reasonable and practicable. When there are social events and seminars, and again, this likely is not going to apply to you as much as it is to the board, but it's important to consider posting a courtesy agenda announcing that a quorum might be present, and to state that no business of the public body will be discussed and no action proposed. So if there's some sort of something that you're all going to be attending in the public, it's important for us to post a courtesy agenda, indicate that no action will be taken, that you're just attending this, but because the quorum is technically going to be present, that's best practice. As I kind of alluded to earlier, the agenda must list the specific matters to be discussed, considered, or decided, and they have to include enough information so the general public understands, what's going to be addressed at the meeting. It's better not to use legalese, which I am guilty of doing, acronyms, or slang. Another important thing to keep in mind is if it's not on the agenda, do not discuss it. As I mentioned previously, if action is taken at a meeting on an item that's not properly noticed, then that particular action violates open meeting law and is null and void. Further, the violation may still subject the public body to penalties. And so it's important, like I said, if it's not on the agenda, don't discuss it. And to avoid any sort of quorum or even a splintering of the quorum on any action that you're going to see potentially in the future. The public has the right to attend, listen, tape record, and videotape, but they can't speak or disrupt except for call to the public. And I don't recall, do you do call to the public currently? I don't believe you are. Is that right? No. Okay. 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 You do not have to do a general call, but if you do a general call, then there's specific rules that do apply. So if you ever change that protocol, I think it's important that we touch base. Basically, the best practice, there are exceptions to this, but in my opinion, the best practice is if you have a call to the public, you do not address, and they're addressing some sort of grievance, just don't address it with them at all. And you can tell them in advance or even put it on the agenda that that during call to the public that the board or the commissioners cannot address any of the issues raised during call to the public, because then you get yourself in a position where you could be violating open meeting law because it wasn't properly agendized, because you didn't know what the person was going to be discussing, obviously. So this is where I'm going to. You can ask that the matter be placed on a future agenda for call to the public. You can respond to criticism, but again, I just think it's cleaner to just not address anything at all. And you can direct staff to study the matter, but that's essentially all you can do. You can't really respond in any meaningful way if you do have call to the public. During the meeting, don't pass notes, text, email, whisper, or talk with other board members. I would say don't do this before or after the meeting, because it can be construed as discussing business and not in an open forum. So executive sessions are only permitted. Yes. Yes.
In our process of we get a motion
Mm-hmm.
in a second, and then we have discussion.
Yes.
That's discussion among ourselves, and at that point, we don't take anyone. You're not referring to that.
No, as long as the discussion is, as long as the public can hear the discussion, that's the problem. It's when the public cannot hear the discussion that there's a potential open meeting law violation. So as long as the discussion is on the record and it's audible and the audience can hear it, then it's not a problem. Okay. Correct, and try to be, because it's important for your reasoning to be able to be heard by the public And it may be something that it's better to just create a better record that way as well, not just outside of the open meeting law, just creating a better record. Sorry that you guys got here late. I feel like you missed some important stuff. I can go over it with Clay after, if that's okay, from where I start. Okay. So executive session is only permitted for specific legal matters. If there's something that generally the best practice, although you don't always have this ability, is to put the executive session on the agenda if you know that it's something that we're gonna need to address. If you know for certain there's gonna be an issue with one of the planning and zoning items that's come before the commission, we can always put that on the agenda in advance. But secondarily, there is on your agenda, they've put a little disclaimer that basically says that you know, if there's a legal issue that comes up during your public meeting that is already on the agenda, related to an item that's already on the agenda, that we can go into executive session related to that. And in order to do that, you have to have a motion. And then vote on it. The discussion in executive session is confidential. There's no action that's permitted, so this is important. You guys can discuss any sort of legal issues. You have to be careful, though, not discussing the merits of whatever planning and zoning item is before you. You don't want to give an inclination of how people are going to vote. That all needs to be done out in the open meeting. And so there has to be minutes and a recording of the executive session, and it should only include individuals whose presence is reasonably necessary for the executive session, because once you open it up to people that shouldn't be there, you potentially waive the privilege. And that's, again, why it's really important. So I have this saying that's pretty cheesy, but what happens in executive session stays in executive session, and that's really important, because if it doesn't, then you run the risk of waiving the privilege and having people have access to those conversations when you don't want them to. As I mentioned, and I'll mention again, you cannot discuss the merits of what action needs to be taken. You can't take a vote or make a final decision in the executive session. That has to happen out here. And there's no vote or motion that has to be taken to adjourn an executive session. The chair is responsible for adjourning the executive session and reconvening the public session. But there does have to be a vote to go into executive session. So I'm going to talk about kind of the quorum and how we can get ourselves in trouble with respect to that. All discussion, deliberations, considerations among a majority of the members of a public body regarding matters that may foreseeably require final action or a final decision by the governing body constitute legal action, and they have to be conducted in a public meeting or an executive session. And when I say executive session, again, those are discussions and deliberations, not actually votes. The safest course of action is to assume the open meeting law applied whenever a majority of the body discusses business. And so, again, when in doubt, you want the discussions to take place in the open and not behind closed doors or in a way that the public can't hear you. Even if communications on a particular subject do not take place at the same time, this is important, or at the same place. So it doesn't matter that you are all gathered together. If there's email exchanges taking place, that can create an issue as well and can be considered a quorum. And if you're discussing any sort of business that you might take legal action on, you can violate open meeting law. And it's really important to be careful with electronic communications, such as emails. The following are considered meetings, which I thought was important. This was on the Arizona Attorney General's open meeting law. They have a handbook that they've come out with, and they had listed these two, and I thought this was important to note. A one-way electronic communication by one member that is sent to a quorum of the members that relates to a proposed legal action is considered a meeting. It doesn't matter if any of the other members respond. And an exchange of electronic communications among a quorum of the members of a public body that involves a discussion, deliberation, or taking legal action by the public body concerning a matter that is likely to come before the public body is also considered a meeting. So this is an example that was provided in a prior presentation that I had utilized. And so it says, this is an example of a communication that they say is okay versus one that's not. We should discuss safety at First and Main. Because it doesn't propose a legal action, you're more likely to be okay with that. But if you were to say, we should install a crosswalk at First and Main, you're proposing a legal action, and therefore that's not acceptable. That's why it's just always better to err on the side of being overly cautious, because to most people, this wouldn't seem all that significantly different. Another thing to be aware of is splintering the quorum. And so discussion or deliberations between less than a majority of the members violate open meeting law when they're used to circumvent the purpose of open meeting law. So if, 2 or 3 of you get together and you discuss something, and then that information gets passed on to the rest of the members, you're still, even though there wasn't a quorum, you're still potentially violating open meeting law because you're trying to conduct business without doing it in an open meeting. And members of public bodies shall not knowingly direct any staff member to communicate in violation of open meeting law. Resolve all doubts in favor of openness. Legal action taken during a meeting in violation of an open meeting law is void unless ratified. And there are penalties if you do not follow open meeting law. Members and any persons who aid, attempt, or agree to aid in a violation face a civil penalty of up to $500 for each violation, equitable relief in the court's discretion, and reasonable attorney's fees. And if there is an intent to deprive the public of information, the court may remove a public officer from office, and they may charge the officer and any person that aided or agreed to aid or attempted to aid all costs and attorney's fees. So there are pretty significant penalties if you do not comply. Let me go through these slides and make sure I didn't miss anything. I've kind of, like I said, I've kind of changed this. Do you have any questions while I'm looking through this?
I've got a question.
Yes.
I understand what you're saying about the open meeting law. Discussing things outside of the meeting. Accountable to the law and
Essentially, yes. Generally, it's a civil penalty, but you could be removed, and there are more significant penalties if it's an intentional violation.
Question is, we're up here discussing, as far as I'm enlightened, that's our job to discuss non-issue. The public absolutely hated our discussion, came at us with a lawsuit. You have representation?
So your question is kind of multifaceted, but number one, I want to be clear that you're allowed to discuss, if you have something on your agenda and you can discuss among yourselves as long as the public is present on the record. I don't want you to, I'm not trying to suggest that you can't. It's important for you to discuss it on the record so people can understand why you reached the decision you did. In terms of representation, if there was a lawsuit and you were complying with the law and there wasn't, because there is an issue, if for some reason you intentionally violated, you likely would not be able to get representation in that situation. But generally, yes, as a commissioner, if you're sued because they didn't like your decision, you would have representation for that. Did I answer all of your questions? Okay.
What about the situation where you get a call at home?
Well, if it's from, that's a good question. If it's just a single one-on-one conversation and you don't address it with the board at all, I don't think that you're gonna have a problem there, but I would just say to be cautious. I mean, I know you're gonna get calls, I know the board gets calls, but just be cautious. And if it's gonna be something that's coming before you, I would be very careful not to address it with your fellow commissioners unless it's on the record. So like, for example, I know this happens in the board meetings sometimes. There's a planning and zoning issue that's hotly contested, which we've had quite a few of those lately. We had a very long board meeting last meeting. And the board will sometimes get emails or voicemails or phone calls, and they will discuss those on the record. I personally feel like the best record is made if the person is here. So if you have someone who calls you and they're complaining or they have strong feelings about something that you're going to be making a decision on, I would suggest that they come here and air those grievances or concerns on the record, because that's the best record that can be made is with the person coming here. But you can take those calls and then say, you know, sometimes they'll just say, I received multiple calls related to this issue, either opposing it or not opposing it, or in support rather. And you can address those on the record. Yes.
But they are here at the meeting as well, and but they show up.
I would just tell them that the best thing to do would be, I mean, obviously we're in a small town. It's difficult to avoid this. I am assuming that this probably is a little more difficult in Maricopa County or Pima County, but probably not impossible. But I think it's best. It's not that you can't discuss it with them because they're not a member of the board. So they're a private citizen. You're not splintering the quorum. But again, any discussions you have, you can't just before the meeting talk to everyone and say, so-and-so told me this, and you're talking about, it's best to do that out in the public and say, I received this call from so-and-so, and this is their concerns about this particular rezoning. In terms of how you handle that, I leave it in your discretion, but I would suggest to them that the best way to get all of their thoughts on the record is to come and be present at the meeting and to discuss those.
And the bad thing is, you know everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes.
That's why we have this process, because we every
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to road as far as at this meeting, as well as at large. I don't feel that a community member, as far as the open meeting laws.
Correct.
But as we go along, you did mention that as a quorum, you know, if 5 others show up at the same wedding.
Exactly, and that's going to happen here. I mean,
And yeah, if you know, I personally, after a meeting, walked to the door with another commissioner, discussing what we just worked on in the meeting. And yet, you know, that's just 2 of us. That's not a quorum. We're just casually talking about it as a meeting. I don't see that that's a.
if you've already made a decision on it, probably not. I mean, if it's not going to come before you, but I'm of the opinion of just to be extra careful, because you just don't want to, you want to try to avoid any sort of litigation moving forward or any sort of perceived violations. But again, if you've already voted on it and you don't expect that it's going to come before you again, and that's the problem. Some of these things come before you again in a different.
So today all we did was set up.
Correct.
So if we walk out the door, the commissioner.
No, that's not a good idea.
Yeah. Okay.
So can someone come back on for my class?
Yes. Technically, I mean, it would technically be the board's decision, though. I'm trying to think of something that you decide.
Anyone can sue.
Exactly, exactly.
But you're not gonna be liable.
Exactly. Not individually liable, no.
The board gets sued,
No.
the board gets sued, it's Grant County. Don't like it, they can't sue you because it's a decision that you made a decision.
Yeah.
That's what they're gonna.
Correct. And they may name the commission. I mean, I've seen them do both. I think that the board is the ultimate decision maker, so I think they would have to be named, but. But I wouldn't, yes. Mhm. I think that's very wise. You know what? That's a good question, because it's not the same board, but it's a different board and you're gonna be deciding on the matter. Let me, mhm. Are you? I, I think I would just be careful to just take information. Let me look into that a little further, but I think as long as there's not a quorum and you're just taking information and you're not really like having an actual discussion, you're just obtaining information, because you could just as easily come and watch the video. This is public. I would just be concerned if there were things that were being discussed that weren't discussed in the meeting. That would be a potential concern for me. So let me think about that a little bit more and get back with you off the record. I don't think, I'm saying it's not a definite no, but I'm saying probably proceed with caution, and maybe we can talk about the best way to do that. Did you have any other questions at this point? No? Okay. Does someone else have a question, or are you good?
It's not unusual, you know, to
No, I don't think so. I mean, as long as you're talking to the public and you're just referring them to planning and zoning, there's no issue there. Oh, absolutely. And you can refer them to whoever they need to speak with. But again, I think Clay's point was really well taken. I mean, it's an issue that may come up before you at some point if they're bringing it to planning and zoning. And so just be very cognizant of the fact that you don't want to show your cards or indicate how you may feel about whatever their grievance is. Yeah, whether you agree with them or not, yeah. And then in terms of the lawsuit, I know that probably scares everyone, but it would be as a commission, not individually. And that's just, it's unlikely. I haven't seen it since I've been here, but I'm saying it's not impossible. And like Dustin said, we get all kinds of lawsuits, and most of them don't have merit. So, but that shouldn't concern you. That's just part of like he said, the board, I don't know how many times, because of what the board's function is, they have to be named oftentimes in lawsuits, and they're just a nominal party. The lawsuit has nothing to do with the board or their action or inaction. It's just that whoever's suing wants some sort of relief, whether it be injunctive relief, and the board has to be named just to ensure that whatever relief they're granted, that it can be, they can make the board do it. That the court basically can order the board to do something or not do something. So, does anyone else have any questions?
As far as the
Just be careful not to be communicate. Like, if she just sends the agenda, that's fine. But in terms of like having any further discussion about it, that's where I would be concerned.
on my computer and it's something. Same thing we're gonna discuss.
That's correct. But again, it's just the matter of the fact that it's public record doesn't make it not an open meeting law violation. So just be cognizant of how you communicate via email to make sure that you're not somehow creating a quorum, splintering a quorum, discussing any sort of potential legal action that may be taken.
And just a comment?
Yes.
Gene, it's a good point. For what you received, if someone wants that document,
That's a good point.
they need to go to planning.
I just delete it and figure I'm gonna be shocked when I get here.
Don't share those documents. That comes as a public record.
Absolutely. I wasn't thinking, that's a good point, Dustin. And public records requests should always go through planning and zoning. Don't do anything yourself, because there's many statutes. I can't even tell you how many statutes that govern what we can and can't disclose and how things can be disclosed. And so if you ever got an inquiry from the public and they wanted documentation, that would need to go through planning and zoning.
I pretty much read it and delete it. Want somebody come in, I'll say, hey, let me read those. I'm like,
One thing I think probably needs to be said, even though it's kind of obvious. Never fly off. Not that would bite us if you just said, or somebody, why are they all involved? You reply all, then you just communicated with everybody on the board.
Send it to them as hoping to avoid that.
we all know the town's growing and this is more content.
It is, and that's the thing. I mean, I know we're in a small town, which is a blessing, but the people are becoming more and more litigious, and so it's just important. Not to mention, we want to follow the rules, and it's easy. It's easy because this is, like, I came from private practice, and this is very strange for me. Public records law, open meeting law. I mean, this is very different. And if you're not from this world, and you guys are now part of this world, but it's not, in my mind, it's not always sensical, and that's why it's just always better to err on the side of just avoiding any pitfalls and not communicating about anything substantively outside of in the open meeting. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes. Yes. So that's a good question, and it depends, which is the best lawyer response ever. But there, generally, it would only be the people that were in the executive session. I think there may be an exception if one of the board members was like missing. But it depends on what's being discussed. So sometimes if like certain employment issues are being discussed, that employee may have access. When we're doing when there's an audit, the auditor may have access. There can potentially be access if the court orders access. So it's not that clean. Generally, like a general rule is no one has access, but there are exceptions to the general rule. So it just depends on the circumstance. Generally not, no. Again, like I said, there are exceptions, but the general rule, no, they would not. And not, especially not just some person that doesn't have any like affiliation with what's being discussed. Do you have any other questions? Yes. If it's going to be very specific, wait, hold on. Let me interrupt you really quickly. Okay, that's fine. I just that question, but I was going to say if you're going to talk about something specific that could be problematic, we should do that off the record. Okay.
Sometimes I know all of them.
Correct.
So if
It's a majority. So how many do we have up here? 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, correct. 5 of them. I mean, if you have any doubt, I would just put it on the agenda because it doesn't hurt to put it on the agenda.
I don't think it's usually
Anytime they're gonna gather, it's good. It's best practice is to put it, post it, and just say that no business will be addressed. So like the board have to go to things all the time. I know you post.
We call it quorum.
Yeah. So the amount of a quorum depends on the size of the board or commission. Correct, but if when in doubt, I would just notice it anyways. Like if there's a possibility there's going to be 5, it would probably be better just to err on the side of noticing it. Only. Do you have any other questions? Did I confuse you royally, or do you feel like there's some clarity? Okay. All right. Well, if you have any questions, you can always email me directly. I don't know. I'm sure you can circulate my email address to them. I think some of you may have had it at some point, but you can always ask me questions if you have any questions related to this. I'm happy to help. You can also circulate my direct line as well. Okay. Thank you.
Anyways, back to our previous thing of this. I don't know. Can't service that job